When 911 dispatchers got a call from a man in Carlsbad, California reporting that he and his friend had just been blitz attacked by a sniper hiding in the grass, they didn't really know what to think. First of all, Carlsbad was a rather tame, affluent beach city with a low crime rate. You didn't exactly have snipers just hanging out on the sandy beaches to catch some rays. They say people will do some crazy things for love, but Diana Lovejoy took that expression to a whole new level. Shall we? Diana was a native Californian born and raised and had gone to UC San Diego, where she graduated with a BA in literature, music, psychology, and French. This led to Diana doing a lot of technical writing for work. In 2005, Diana Lovejoy met a guy named Greg Mulvihill on a dating website, and the two immediately hit it off. Greg also worked in the tech industry as a software engineer and enjoyed fitness and hiking, so they were a solid match for each other. In 2007, the two got hitched and moved to Carlsbad soon after. And while technical writing was a job that paid the bills, it definitely wasn't Diana's passion. Diana's true passion was in fitness, and in 2008, she fulfilled her dream of becoming a personal trainer and triathlon coach. A few years later, Diana gave birth to their first child after a few unsuccessful pregnancies. But by the time their son was 2, their marriage was beginning to crumble and would only continue to be put under pressure. Greg had lost his job, and Diana became the sole income for the family, which was obviously a super stressful ordeal for them. The stress of life was taking its toll on the couple, and they tried marriage counseling but just couldn't seem to make it work. And then one day in 2014, as Greg was coming home, a sheriff stopped him at his front door and gave him a temporary restraining order from Diana. Greg was shocked and tried to explain that this was his home and that there must have been some mistake, but the sheriff wouldn't hear it. Greg legit had 10 minutes to get in, grab his and get out, and there was nothing he could do about it. Greg did as he was told, but also needed to know what the hell the restraining order was for. And when he finally did find out, he knew he had a big storm coming. Apparently, Diana claimed that she'd woken up in the middle of the night a few days earlier to Greg forcing himself on her. She also alleged that Greg had been doing the same thing to their son, and that he was also using and getting while around their kid. Greg was like,
what?
Because that certainly hadn't happened. Unfortunately, it was her word against his, and off to the doghouse he went, or most likely a hotel for the night. Going forward, Greg was only allowed to see his son for 10 hours a week while psychological examinations were done along with substance testing. Not going down without a fight, Greg retorted that Diana was the nut job and that she was the one who was manipulating him and the cops and needed the psych eval. Finally, in November of 2015, the examinations were concluded and custody was changed to 50-50 when no evidence of Greg having done any of the things Diana said was found. No kidding, said Greg the gaslit. In June 2016, the divorce was finalized and Diana was pissed. But ever the one to try out new hobbies, Diana decided to take all the pent-up anger inside of her and focus it on her new goal of becoming an expert marksman. There was this indoor shooting range in Carlsbad called Iron Sights, and Diana's newest lovejoy was taking the old rifle out for a spin. She started taking lessons at Iron Sights on the regular so she could defend herself. Against whom, you may ask? Why, the big bad Greg, of course. Yeah, she claimed that the authorities hadn't listened to her and they'd got it all wrong. Diana was afraid for her life and had to take the rifle lesson so she could defend herself against her crazy ex-husband when he came for her. While on her quest to become Mark's mama extraordinaire, Diana hired a personal coach from the range to train her. Weldon McDavid, a former Marine, was assigned as Diana's trainer, and soon enough, the two were texting each other constantly. He had heard Diana's story about her crazy ex-husband who had fooled the police and had free access to her and her son, and he felt bad and wanted to help her. Weldon had a few previous clients who reminded him of Diana, all single moms who were wanting to protect their families or hide from violent exes. So on top of being her personal trainer, he kind of became her personal protector. This is the moment in every scary movie where you'd go,
"No, Weldon, don't fall for it, it's a trap."
But it was too late. On the evening of September 1st, the frightening 911 call was placed to local dispatchers. A frantic man's voice explained that someone had just fired 6 or 7 rounds at him and his friend, and that his friend had been hit. The caller was a man named Jason Kovac, and the friend he was calling about, as you can probably guess, was Greg Mulvihill. Paramedics arrived at the scene to find Greg sitting in his car with a deep wound in the side of his chest. Greg was rushed to the nearest hospital while armed police searched the area where the alleged sniper had been spotted. They canvassed the area for hours, but it seemed their marksman had disappeared into the night. And now, the call about a sniper was already enough to make the authorities a little suspicious, but when they heard Greg had also placed a 911 call earlier that day, they were completely suspicious. So apparently, Greg had gotten a call from someone claiming they were a private investigator who had been hired by Diana. The PI alleged he had the documents proving Greg had harmed his son and that Diana would be using them against him. Greg was like, okay, literally what? Because again, he hadn't, and told the PI, and the PI was like,
hold on a second, let me call you back.
So the PI called back and told him he'd be leaving the documents in an envelope near Greg's house, taped to a power pole off the path of this specific trail. Greg called the cops and was like, hey, so I just got a weird call from a guy claiming all this stuff. He wants me to go out on this weird treasure hunt. what should I do? The cops told him it was kind of up to him what he wanted to do. They couldn't really do much on their end with no real threats being made. So Greg called up his friend Jason, who lived in his building, to go with him to the spot. Greg and Jason took flashlights and headed down the trail and toward the pole the PI had described. They kept their distance and used their flashlights, but they couldn't see anything taped to the pole. Then Greg spotted something at the base of it, and an uneasy feeling washed over both of the men as their sneaking suspicions of a setup were quickly becoming more plausible. Pointing their flashlights into the dark wilderness, the men scanned the forest until they thought they spotted what looked like some clothing lying in the tall grass. Upon closer inspection, they discovered they were staring at some clothing, but more importantly, they were also staring down the barrel of a weapon that opened fire. As Jason mentioned, 6 or 7 rounds were fired at the two as they ran for their literal lives. They reached the car just as Greg lost consciousness, and Jason was immediately dialing 911. If it weren't for Greg's foresight to bring a buddy and Jason's quick action of calling for help, Greg very well might not have made it. The police gave chase well into the night, but unfortunately couldn't find their sniper. They investigated whatever it was at the base of the power pole the men said they saw and found a beach towel that had like the Angry Birds characters on them. And beneath the enraged-looking cartoon fouls lay something far more foul. Literal human. Greg was in the hospital fighting for his life, but luckily the entry wound was below his left armpit, missing the important bits, and he was going to be okay. He survived his surgeries and miraculously was released after just 2 days. Once Greg was back home, the investigation was on, and the first person the police looked into was his wife, Diana. They didn't suspect that Diana was the one in the grass that night, but perhaps Diana was the metaphorical snake in the grass that night. And as for who the sniper really was, she had no idea. It was anyone's guess. Investigators traced the call placed from the alleged PI to a burner phone, and while they weren't able to figure out who'd placed the call, they were able to trace where and when the phone had been purchased. A Best Buy just a few miles from the Lovejoy's house, and it had been purchased 2 weeks before the attack. The cops watched through CCTV footage and spotted Diana Lovejoy pulling into the parking lot, entering the store, purchasing the phone, and waltzing on her way. That was enough evidence to tie Lovejoy to the attempted assassination, and Diana was promptly arrested despite her denial of doing the dastardly deed. And you know the point in every case where the person realizes that the cops aren't buying their story, and so they suddenly remember something in a last-ditch effort to try and get the blame off of them one last time? Diana thinks about it for a second and then goes, actually, you know what? There was this guy who kinda sorta, I don't know, volunteered to protect and defend me. And the investigators were like, yeah, it was the guy named Weldon. Oh, and she also gave the burner phone to Weldon that night and dropped him off near Greg's house. Diana continued to spill the lemongrass tea and said that the plan was for Weldon to only scare Greg that night. She dropped him off and circled the area a few times before going to pick him back up. When she came back, Weldon was sprinting towards the car and hurled himself into it, yelling for Diana to drive fast. According to Diana, she claimed as soon as Weldon was in the car, he was going off about how it had gone horribly wrong and that he had to pull the trigger and nothing could be done. On September 8th, the SWAT team descended upon the home of Weldon Davis and found exactly what one would expect from a guy with a military background who worked at an indoor shooting range. A load of firearms. They also found a suppressor, which was illegal in California, and a bunch of spent shell casings. Weldon was immediately arrested and fumbled his way through the police interrogation nervously. But when they popped the pregunta about the pile of his poo found beneath the pole, let's just say his cheeks were pretty clenched. Weldon informed them he was just running along a dirt road one day when duty called. He'd found the perfect spot off of a trail by a power pole to take those brownies out of the oven, and that must have been what they found. Obviously, the cops weren't buying what Weldon was saying, and the more he kept talking, the more it sunk in for him that he had been completely set up. Weldon found out that Diana had completely lied about her tragic backstory, that her husband wasn't this violent addict, he wasn't touching her or the kid, and that Diana was never truly in fear of her life. In the interrogation videos, you can see the moment it hits him that he knows he's really f***ed up. His head falls into his hands and he mutters under his breath, "I think I've been set up. In fact, I know I've been set up." Not only was Weldon blinded by her lies, he was also blinded by his guys, the old brain between the legs, because Diana was totally sleeping with him to get him to do what she wanted. Diana and Weldon were both charged in the attempted slaying of Greg, and nearly a year after the attack in the wilderness that night, they both went to trial. 45-year-old Diana sat quietly in her chair, barely showing emotion throughout the trial, only shaking her head silently when the allegations against her were presented. The prosecution was trying to prove that Diana and her pistol-poppin' personal protector had devised a plan to get rid of Greg once and for all. Jason Kovac took the stand and recounted the terrifying night of hearing his friend shout that he saw the barrel, hearing the rounds fired, and seeing his friend go down. Meanwhile, Weldon's defense was argued that because he was a trained Marine and a firearm instructor, that if he had wanted to take out Greg, he totally would have. I know, talk about a rock-solid defense, right? Obviously, that wasn't going to be a strong enough argument for Diana, so her attorneys went with the same story she initially proposed. That Greg was this big jerk who loved nothing more than using substances and harming his family. Yeah, as if putting a literal hole in our victim's torso wasn't enough, let's totally bring up the other stuff that the investigators had found no evidence of. That's not gonna look desperate. They also found out that Diana had paid Weldon $2,000 to scare Greg that night, as they both claimed. Then, Diana's Aunt Diana, yes, they were both named Diana, got up to testify. Auntie Di recalled a time back in 2015 when niece Diana came to her and asked if she knew of anyone who would be willing to get rid of Greg for her. While out at a nice restaurant, Lovejoy propositioned Aunt Diana with a strange request, and as it turns out, a deputy district attorney just so happened to be munching away at the next table over and tipped off the police. The police contacted Aunt Diana, who assured them that it wasn't anything serious in order to protect her niece at the time. Niece Diana had fed Aunt Diana the same story of the toxicity and violence in the home, and Aunt Diana insisted whatever was happening was not bad enough to warrant such dramatic action, and urged her to not go through with it. But a year later, when she heard that Greg had actually been attacked, it was time to come forward with what she knew. Both Weldon and Diana alleged that the intent was never to assassinate Greg, it's just things got out of hand too quickly. During the final statement portions of the trial, Diana explained through tears that while the love in her marriage was over, she never would have wanted his life to be. Weldon maintained that he was an excellent marksman who never missed a shot, and that hitting Greg was just an aiming error on his part. Ultimately, the jury found Diana and Weldon guilty of the crimes, and Diana's eyes widened in horror as the juror read out the verdict. And now, I don't want to make any assumptions here, but something tells me Diana wasn't expecting things to not go in her favor, because she really started to look bad. All the color drained from her face as the realization finally hit her that she was going to prison, and she passed out. It was quite dramatic. The juror had finished reading out the verdict and moved on to read Weldon's, and that's when you can hear a loud thunk as Diana's head hit the side of the table. Chaos in the courtroom erupted as Diana's family cried out in shock. You probably already know that seeing someone lose consciousness is actually a really scary thing to witness, especially in Diana's case because her eyes never closed. Yeah, they had to tilt her back in the chair and pause for the trial while they called for an ambulance. The whole time, her eyes were just staring open at the ceiling while they were trying to help her. Diana was wheeled out of the courtroom after being handed her 26 to life sentence, while Weldon was sentenced to 50 years to life. Diana will be eligible for parole when she's 70 years old, and Weldon when he is 100. So it's safe to say they won't be seeing the light of day anytime soon. And that is the tragically twisted tale of Diana Lovejoy and her sniper in the grass. I told you it was a bad one, because not only did Diana dupe Greg, she also duped Weldon and ruined so many lives in the process. We'll see you next time.